It's not often that we get a new retro handheld that can quite literally change the way that we play games. But that really is what the AYN Thor does. It is a new form factor, new style of handheld that we just have not seen before outside of original hardware, and it is done mostly right. Dual screen retro handhelds is something the community has been asking for years, and now it's here and it's kind of awesome. Hey everyone, Joey here, and today we're going to be doing a review on the AYN Thor. This is the longest review that I have personally ever done. I am sorry, I apologize for it. There is a lot that I have to talk about and I could not condense it any further, so let's get into it. But first, special thanks to today's video sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay is running some specials in October. You can get purple solder mask at no extra cost to spice up your solder masking, and they're doing up to 40% off TPU FDM printing. The heavier your print, the bigger the discount. And they're also doing a sale on PLA white FDM. Check out PCBWay, linked in the description. Back to the AYN Thor. We can start off pretty strong here. There is simply no better way right now to play Nintendo DS and Nintendo 3DS games emulated on any other device. This really is the best of the best. There are a few things here that are exciting, and it's the reason I'm saying that. First, there is dual OLED screens. AMOLED on both if we go by AYN spec sheet. The top is a 6-inch, 120Hz, 1080p, 16:9 OLED screen. And honestly, it is crisp and it is gorgeous. I am a massive fan of it. On the bottom, we have a 3.92-inch, 1240 by 1080, 60Hz, 31:27 OLED screen, same as the one that is in the Retroid Pocket Classic and the Retroid Pocket Mini V2, for those of you familiar with those devices. This blend of screens is honestly great from my perspective. You get the ability to have big screen 3DS gaming, keeping the aspect ratio, and blowing up the top screen, and you have a nice sizable, usable bottom screen as well. It is the exact same scenario for Nintendo DS games as you would expect. It is an awesome way to play both of these systems. Now, you can, of course, shrink the top screens. If you wanted to keep the aspect ratio and just match the bottom screen, you can do so in the software. And there are games where you'd want to do this, especially if they're going back and forth from top and bottom. Personally, I prefer keeping the top big for most gaming outside of those games that really need them to be the same size. Obviously, 3DS and DS aren't the only systems that you can play on the AYN Thor. I would argue that this is probably the most complete handheld on the market right now because of the dual screens, and because there isn't a system that you can't play on this. You can of course play Game Boy and Game Boy Color beautifully on the bottom. If you wanted, you can put it on the top. Or you can move up to the top screen and play PSP there because it's a 16:9 display that matches PSP. You can load up some GameCube or PlayStation 2 on either screen and enjoy that. Use the bottom for 4x3, use the top for 4x3, use widescreen hacks and keep it on the top. You could do whatever you want. Then, of course, you can also play some Nintendo Switch. You can do some Game Hub, all of that. If we look at Android games, and you just want to leave RuneScape on the bottom, doing whatever RuneScape does when it's idle, put up another game up top like Destiny, and play that while letting RuneScape do RuneScape things. It is insane the amount of use cases that you have here. The dual screens are beneficial for way more than just 3DS and DS. They enable you to stop caring about the right aspect ratios for things, because either screen can work for multiple use cases. Personally, I love using the second screen as guides, and I use the top screen for gaming. So that's how I play a lot of games. I love it. It's awesome. There's a lot of use cases here. And so that feeds right into the performance conversation. There is a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 powering the AYN Thor. This is the exact same processor that AYN has been using for the last 2 years on the Odin 2, the Odin 2 Mini, and the Odin 2 Portal. So, needless to say, we have absolutely documented every aspect of this chip over the last 2 years in videos and written guides on the internet, everywhere. You can find information for pretty much every game out there for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Now, I received a lot of questions this week from people that did not know that fact. So for their sake, let's talk about what the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 can do. The actual answer is basically everything. Outside of games that just don't emulate well no matter what platform, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Wii, 3DS, PSP, and so on can be emulated, upscaled, and run perfect. Then you can open up a can of worms by playing some Nintendo Switch if you want to, or jump into some Game Hub or Winlator if that is your speed. We'll talk more about all of this later, but then there's of course Android games as well, and so much more. The price for all of this, well, it starts at $299 for the version that has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And that is the performance that we're talking about all above. This base model will come with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. Then the next step up is the Pro model at $349. That comes with 12GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage. And it is also the tier that opens up to extra colors now, with white, rainbow, and purple being available to you. The Pro model is also the model that I have here today for review. Lastly, we have the Max model at $429. That comes with 16GB of RAM and 1TB of storage. And also you get the extra colors available as well. The $299 tier is black only for color. Now there is another version, the Lite, and that offers a Snapdragon 865 processor as the main difference. That goes for $249. However, the processor is slower than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the storage speed is slower, Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi 6 instead of Wi-Fi 7, and it can only output 1080p over video out. I don't think this model is worth talking about too much, and I also don't have this model for review. But there is one single use case for this model, and that is really if you only care about DS and 3DS. So let me be very clear here. If you only care about DS and 3DS, you will never use it for anything else, then I could see a case to be made for the Lite option. However, at a $50 difference between the two options for how much more powerful the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is, it's kind of a no-brainer in every scenario to just get that $299 base model instead of the $249 model. Now the next question you are going to ask is 8GB of RAM enough? The answer is kind of complicated. Yes, it is enough. We have documented this over the last 2 years. It is enough for basically every scenario you can think of. So yes. However, there are some scenarios where the 128GB of internal storage is the issue instead of the RAM. Look, 128GB of storage in 2025 going into 2026 is rough. Especially on Android, where Android games like Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, and so on can be 30GB each. There is also the part where GameCube and Wii and PlayStation 2 HD texture packs can only be installed to the internal storage. So that also is going to eat up that 128GB really quickly. To be very clear, Android games and these HD texture packs cannot be moved to the SD card. These have to be on the internal storage. So you can see why and how quickly 120GB of storage gets to be very limiting. There are also a lot of other reasons, but those are the main big ones. Now that being said, if you do not play Android games, if you do not use HD texture packs, then yes, the $299 base model, 8GB of RAM, all of that will be more than fine, and that's probably what you should get. However, I personally think the sweet spot is the Pro version for 12GB of RAM. That's usually where I would stick and where I would have bought if the Max model was not worth the cost of a 1TB SD card. You are basically saving the ability to have to go and buy a 1TB SD card by just getting the Max if you were going to get the Pro. That's how I see it. I grabbed the white Max and I'm sticking with that pre-order after this review. Spoilers. There is also an accessory pack or you can buy the accessories individually. I was not sent any of these for review, so I can't talk about them, but we will discuss the grip a little bit later on. Let's jump in and do a tour of the handheld, so you can get an idea of the controls and the ergonomics. We have a stick top layout here, and the sticks are grippy textured caps. They're Hall effect, and going to be quite honest, they're better than I would have expected for inset sticks. I find them to be quite capable for most situations when it comes to emulation. However, I would not wish playing Call of Duty on this device on my worst enemy. I have reviewed a lot of devices over the years. This might be actually the most uncomfortable device for something like Call of Duty that I have ever personally experienced. This isn't due to the sticks, but it is due to the overall ergonomics of the device, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, for emulation and most other use cases, it has been just fine to use these sticks, but as you can imagine, especially with something that's inset, the device does have some ergonomic compromises. D-pad is on the bottom here. This is my personal preferred layout, and it is a slightly smaller D-pad than something like the Odin 2 Portals, and it is more in line with a usual Retroid device, or I think the Odin 2's original size. I don't have any of these to confirm on hand, but you get the idea. This D-pad is great, though. It is accurate, it is loose enough, and it has great pivot. AYN makes awesome D-pads, and this is a similar feeling to all of their D-pads. So it is, the same. Now, I played and beat Metal Slug 7 on Friday using this D-pad just fine, and it felt good to me. I have played and gone through a whole bunch of games at this point in my last week of using this, and for my uses, it feels natural, it feels good. Now, on the opposite side, with the buttons, they are a great size and they are very silent. There is barely any noise coming from these at all. It is very muted, tactile feeling, and it has nice travel. However, my unit here does have a problem with the A button sticking. I don't know if it is a problem with all units or if it is just mine, but it sticks often, and it would be a deal breaker to me personally if I got a retail unit that's stuck like this. Now, I do imagine that this is probably a quality control issue, but I have no evidence to back that up other than thinking that they would not ship a device like this. Hopefully, it is only my unit, but I will have to wait for my retail unit to come in until I can confirm that, at which case I will be doing a re-review anyways because I'm getting the white version, and I really want to look at the white version. Now, the buttons on the front are Start and Select at the top, and then we have Home, bottom left, and we have Back, bottom right. We also have an AYN button here at the bottom, and we'll talk about that later. On the back is some very loud shoulder buttons, super clicky, and they stick out quite a bit, but they are easily accessible. Then we get to the triggers, and we have the biggest blunder of the device, in my opinion, and it is the shape and design of the triggers. The triggers are flat, they're boxy, and they are even slightly raised, with the highest point being the edge of the device, completely opposite to the way that any normal person would hold a device. This leads to your hands being in an extremely uncomfortable position when you have to utilize the triggers. This all goes back to my experience playing something like Call of Duty or a shooter. Instead of feeling the actual trigger, you are feeling the absolute edge of it, and it is an absolute shame to experience. This has been such an issue to the point where I have personally remapped all of my controls off of the triggers to the shoulders instead. I am trying to avoid using them as much as possible. There is just absolutely no good way to say this or sugarcoat it. The triggers and the design of them are awful, and they ruin what is otherwise an absolutely fantastic device. The first person who can make a mod to fix these triggers to how they should have been is going to make a lot of money, and I will be the first one to buy those. Continuing our tour, and on the front bottom, we have volume controls, power button, USB-C charging, headphone jack, and SD card slot. Along with charging, the USB-C port is also used for external video out, and currently it can only output the top screen. I don't see that as being an issue personally, especially if you're going to be using this docked, but it is something to be aware of. You also have a few different resolution and frame rate options that you can choose from when using video out. Now, on that topic, the top screen will turn off during video out if you enable that in the software. However, the bottom screen does not. If you close the lid, video out no longer works or continues. Both of these are issues that hopefully AYN can address because it is an OLED screen. You don't want the bottom screen to be on the entire time you are using this docked. And also, there's a lot of use cases where you want to dock this and close the lid and also use it docked. So hopefully these are things that they can fix. Then on the back, we have our fan intake and our exhaust grills above. You do have to be very careful with the fan intake on the back because if you set this down on any surface like a pillow or anything that isn't hard, you could block the intake and heat up the device. Something that I did on accident quite often this week. So if we look at this entire package from a comfort perspective, it is hard to nail this one down. On the one hand, for stick games, I have been very happy with it. Mostly comfortable, and if I don't have to use the triggers, I'm happy. For D-pad gaming, I don't see anything here that would persuade anybody that has fears about D-pad being on the bottom, and that not being comfortable. For my personal usage, I can play D-pad games just fine, because I like D-pad on the bottom, and I just keep my hands flared out, and it is pretty comfortable. It is not a perfect experience by any stretch. You would have to inset the D-pad quite a bit, like on something like the Odin 2 Portal, but it is fine enough for this form factor, and I actually prefer this over D-pad top. However, I think this will be a point of contention for a lot of people, so it's going to be up to you. Now, AYN does sell a grip for this device. I do wish that they had sent me one with my review unit so I could test it out and report back on if and how it solves any of these problems, but that's going to have to wait for my retail unit to arrive, and then we'll talk about it then. Now, I will say, without having the grip here, I'm going to say it is most likely going to be a necessity purchase for any gaming outside of like half an hour to an hour. If you plan on playing this for longer than that, which my normal sessions are way longer than that, you are probably going to need the grip. It is cheap enough that you should probably just buy it anyways, just in case. But I am saying all of this without having one to test it to see if it is a good grip even. I don't know how else you could use this device and not have a cramped experience without a grip. Now, I can't talk about comfort without talking about the hinge. I want to be very clear here. I can't talk about the hinge reliability because I don't have the power to see the future. The Retroid Pocket Flip 2 took 5 months for them to start showing hinge issues. The Mii U Mini Flip showed them instantly. The Retroid Pocket Flip 1 took a little bit as well. There is not much that I can do on my end to test a hinge. Now, that being said, I am not a big fan of the fact that it locks you into different positions. You basically have 3 angles that it locks you into that the hinge sticks to. And I wish we had full control over it because none of those 3 angles is the way that I want to play games. Here is a comparison with the Nintendo DS Lite, and you can see that the angle is much larger. This is closer to the angle that I personally want to play at, but I can't. The Nintendo 3DS and 3DS XL is the same thing. Similar angle to the DS Lite, and it is way different than the Thor. Now, the one saving grace of the Thor is with the OLED's viewing screen angles. It does help negate this a little bit, but I am still finding that my wrists are bending forward more than I want them to be because I can't set the hinge to the spot that I want it to be at. Now, all of that being said, it was late Friday night when I discovered that my favorite way to use this device is like a 2DS. I opened the hinge all the way and I played through multiple games in that form factor, and this easily became my favorite way to use the device. Not only is it vastly more comfortable, but it, funnily enough, becomes easier to use the bottom screen as a real single screen if you want to just do that. And now the top screen acts as like a monitor of some sort, or an extra monitor. Or you can do the complete opposite. Use the top screen as your single screen and use the bottom as something else. It just became easily more comfortable. Now, I might have said that this is probably the best DS and 3DS experience currently, but I think the real scenario here is actually 2DS because this honestly to me is just a lot better. I don't know why, it just is because of the hinge angle. It's better to use. All of that being said, these are workarounds. This should be better from a hinge perspective and a holding it perspective. Using a grip is not a good solution. It is just a workaround we have to do if you want to buy and use this device. For anybody worried about the ergonomics and hinge and all of that, this probably might not be the best device for you if that is your concern, just due to all of these factors. But for everybody else that wants to try workarounds, these are the best that I have available. Now, closing the device is, as you would expect, pretty satisfying. There's a nice click to it, and mostly it just works. I have run into a number of times where I close the device and it is still on. I've had to keep an eye on it. I'm not sure why it doesn't sleep sometimes. However, when it does work and it does sleep, it stays asleep. And then when I open it, I continue on where I was in the emulator and whatever game I was playing. It is nice and easy, and it works how you would expect for a device like this to work. Now, it is faint, but there will be minor impressions of the two circles at the bottom that show up on the top of the screen. It's never really been an issue. These do wipe off, but they are the two spots that hold the screen from hitting everything else. This also does mean there is wide open space if you look at it from the side. Normally, I would not be concerned with this, but the top of the device can flex really heavily, to the point where I'm a little worried about squeezing this a little too much and it might break something. Now, obviously I'm not going around squeezing this, but I do tend to throw my clamshells into my sling bag, like where my Retroid Pocket Flip 1 lives right now. And there are some times where maybe I'm not paying attention to my bag. Maybe somebody might sit on it. Maybe I might squish it up against something. And I get a little worried about what's going to happen to the AYN Thor in those scenarios. I do wish that they had made this more solid, because it does take away from the premium feeling aspect of the device when you open it. Everything just shines when you open the device, and it is the exterior that is completely different. For anybody that has a Retroid Pocket Flip 2, I find that this actually flexes more than that does, and I know I complained about that in that review, so I have to complain about it here again. I don't know why they keep doing this. Clamshells usually mean protection. In this scenario, it feels opposite to that. This honestly is a weird tale of two devices, because I truly feel that the outside design of this device counters how absolutely awesome the inside of the device is. It's a weird scenario. Now, we talked about the screens before, but the dual OLED screens really make this something that you have to see in person to understand just how awesome DS and 3DS games look. Especially this new 6-inch top screen, of which I find to be absolutely gorgeous. Now, on the screen topic, it is important to mention that by default, the top screen is 120 Hz, and the bottom screen is 60 Hz. Well, that is the specs of the actual screens, but not what you are getting in reality. You can enable 120 Hz mode, which does turn both screens to 120 Hz. But because the bottom screen was only made to be 60 Hz, they are using a level of frame skip or some other hack to get the 60 Hz bottom screen to display 120 Hz. That does mean you will see tearing and you will see screen waving on the bottom screen in 120 Hz mode for any fast-paced gameplay. Now, obviously, the other option is setting both screens to 60 Hz if you want them both on. Otherwise, you can just turn off the bottom screen to have the top screen only as 120 Hz. Now, that being said, despite any filming that I've done for review purposes, I have personally only been in 120 Hz mode, so that both screens are 120 Hz, for almost all of my gaming. There are just too many benefits to 120 Hz for me to give it up. The response time benefits, how smooth 120 Hz is, and so much more. But there are some games, and there are some times where I will change it to 60 Hz for both, like Contra 4, Sonic Rush. I was playing Ni no Kuni, that's another game. There are games where you have fast-paced gameplay on the bottom, where you do want to have 60 Hz enabled. But either way, long story short, you have all of the options available to you, so you can turn off either screen, you can turn them to 120 Hz, you can turn them to 60 Hz, you can do whatever you want. It is up to you. We also have access to brightness controls for both screens or either screen. However, the controls for both screens right now do not brightness match. And because the bottom screen appears to be brighter, it currently means that you actually have to adjust the screens individually yourself rather than use the dual screen slider. Hopefully this is something they can add or adjust in the software, because this is really something that needs to exist. I have had to change the brightness so often throughout the day that it is a big annoyance. So adding a dual screen slider that brightness matches is an absolute must here. There is also a weird bug right now where the brightness of the bottom screen resets to full brightness when you sleep the device, and that has been pretty annoying. You basically have to try and tap the slider at the spot where it currently is at to get it to recognize again, and so it's something they need to fix. Let's jump into the audio now, and this is where I was pleasantly surprised. The speakers sound great to me, but they do lack a little bit of bass. And so I do imagine that anybody that wants maybe a bit more of a punchy bass sound, you likely want to use a script to improve the EQ on these, but I think these are good as a baseline. Now I have run into some bugs with the volume where it'll keep playing at loud volume for some reason, even though I'm adjusting the volume controls up and down, and it doesn't reset, and it's weird, and I can't replicate it all the time. It is a bug that shows up in weird scenarios, and I haven't figured out why yet, but it is something that I've told AYN about, and hopefully something they can fix if they can reproduce it. Now, since we're here on the topic of audio, I had a lot of fun with the built-in microphone playing Nintendogs. I named my dog after my wife. And so I was there on the couch next to her, and I was howling because I was playing Nintendogs, and the game asks you to speak commands. So here I am saying things like, Sandra, sit down. Sandra, do this. And needless to say, I slept on the couch that night. But it was extremely worth it because I had so much fun playing Nintendogs again. It has been probably about 20 to 25 years since I've last played that game, the way that you can naturally play it. And the built-in mic of the device just made it so much better. I also tested that microphone using Discord, and it worked out really well. People on the other end could hear me. And so yeah, there's a lot of use cases for the microphone if you want to use it. Let's talk a little bit about the fan noise. And I have kept it on smart mode for basically my entire time. And it has been silent when it needs to be, and it is not loud or noisy when it needs to ramp up. I don't see a reason for you to ever turn this off or to turn it on quiet. Leave it on smart. You won't hear it, and it'll ramp up when it needs to, and it's a perfect scenario. This has been a complete difference from something like the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, where the fan was just a loud disappointment, even on quiet. AYN has solved it and figured it out. No such problem here. Now, with the fan noise, we have to talk about thermals, and throughout my gaming, the device can get warm, but not hot. It will get hot if you happen to charge the device while playing, but I didn't have issues with heat outside of that. I will point out that the right side of the bottom screen, where the screen's ribbon cable is, does get significantly warmer or hotter than the other parts of the screen. And it can be uncomfortable if you plan on using this while charging and playing DS and 3DS games with your finger. Otherwise, you'll just never feel it. Let's talk battery life now. I did a large number of battery tests where I could. 100% to 0% drains, so it took me a long time. And basically, we have the normal Android 24-hour sleep drain of about 2 to 4%. Charging is hard to measure, but it is pretty quick, up to 80%, and then slower after that, as usual. I would say it's about an hour to hour and a half maximum, as this does have 27-watt charging. But then we get to gaming. And for 8x resolution DS gaming and 4x 3DS gaming, it is roughly 6 hours of battery life at max brightness, both screens, performance mode on, smart fan, 10% audio, LEDs are on, and Wi-Fi is on. Surprisingly, I got the same numbers using 120 Hz mode enabled as well. I then did another quick test, only up to 50% and 50% brightness, and I saw just under 10 hours of battery life, which is just absolutely fantastic. This is likely more of a normal usage for most people because I don't think a lot of people are going to max out the brightness on this unless you're outside. I did the same test with Nintendo Switch using Breath of the Wild as the game, and it was right under 4 hours of battery life, which is surprisingly good. The bottom screen was still on, but it was only showing the Thor control center. Long story short, battery is just not a concern. Or at least it is not a concern to me. I don't know what expectations you have of battery, but all of this and my week playing it has been perfect. Let's go ahead and talk software now. And you have the usual Android pull-down menu at the top, and there are performance modes of standard, performance, and high performance. Personally, I think you want to stick to standard or performance. High performance is rarely ever needed. We have the fan profiles of quiet, smart, or strong. And again, I usually leave this on smart. You never have to care about this. Don't worry about it. We have LED control to change the colors or turn them off. You can also change the button layout from Nintendo layout to Xbox or off if you're going to dock it. You can adjust the triggers to digital or analog or both. Personally, I leave this as both. Never had to change it. There's the ability to change from 60 Hz to 120 Hz here, but there is a better way, and I'll show you later. And then we have charging separation. This helps to charge the device instead of the battery. So it will stop charging the battery and it'll just directly power the device. This helps if you want to play while charging and you don't want to ruin the battery. If you're ever going to dock the device, make sure you turn on charging separation. It'll help to preserve your battery life and you don't have to deal with thermals or fan noise. Then you have Bluetooth, of course, and yes, you can connect multiple controllers, you can play local multiplayer, all of that fun stuff. And there's also the usual Android other settings. Now, one thing to point out is floating icon, because this is going to be the first thing people turn off or change. By default, it shows up as a white line on the right side of the screen. And if you go here and you tap the arrow, you can change the transparency all the way off. That way, you can still swipe in from the right to get the floating icon menu and have all of those benefits, and you don't need to turn it off. Now, key adapter is for games that need on-screen button mapping, but also at the bottom, you can set per app settings for controller layout. So whatever app you're in, if you slide in from the right, these settings will apply to this specific app. So maybe you're streaming and you want to change the layout to Xbox mode. You can do that. Maybe you want to change the performance mode to normal mode, which is standard mode for a streaming app. You can do that. All these settings on the bottom are on a per app basis. It's awesome. Lastly, if we head into Android settings, Thor settings, there's more you can do. You can adjust the vibration strength. You can set your video output mode and settings to do with that. And you can map the back key to something else if you want, and so on. Now, there are, of course, even more options to do with the dual screens. For instance, if you tap and hold on an app, you can choose where to launch it. Global, internal, which is top, or external, which is bottom. The basic idea, though, is whichever screen that you touch is where the app will load. So if you tap an app on the bottom screen, it's going to load on the bottom screen. If you tap on the top screen, it'll load on the top screen. If you change the setting of where it's going to load, it'll load to whatever screen you set. The general idea is you tap on the screen where you want the controls to work. But hold that thought for just a second, because we have the Thor Control Center, and it is activated by pushing the AYN button at the bottom. Now on the settings page, you can enable or disable 120 Hz or 60 Hz mode. But then you have all of the same toggles that we saw in the swipe down menu here as well. But there is one extra option, and it is called Focus Mode. Focus Mode is absolutely awesome. This is where you can set it to auto, top, or bottom, and it will lock where your actual controls respond to. So, for example, let's say you have a game at the top and you have a walkthrough at the bottom. You can set this to auto lock to the top screen. So that means the controls are only going to work for the top screen where you're actually gaming. And you can scroll the bottom screen with your finger. The controls will not work on the bottom. You just use your finger to swipe up and down. The controls will only work on the top. This helps because if you do not turn this on, there might be a scenario where you forget to tap on the top screen and you're still on the bottom screen and you push something like B and it exits out of that walkthrough. Auto lock is absolutely awesome. It is a fantastic function. It is insanely useful. All in all of the software gives me pretty much everything that I would need and want from a device like this. Still on the software front, let's talk a little bit about Apollo and Artemis streaming. The AYN Thor matches my AYN Odin 2 Portal for streaming. It's the same processor, it is still Wi-Fi 7, so it's pretty much the exact same. I should also point out that yes, GeForce Now also works on here just fine, without issues, controls are recognized, and all of that. This also goes for the Xbox and PlayStation streaming apps. Outside of Snapdragon 8 Elite devices, this would be one of the better Android devices for streaming that I have personally tested. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is a beast for streaming. It is really good. And so we get to the last topic of today, and it is performance. We talked about this before, but the processor is well documented at this point. You could likely find any game that you want to see and how it's running by typing in Odin 2 plus whatever game into Google and finding a video. But let's run through everything anyways. From PlayStation 1 and under, there is of course no problems here and upscaled. Either screen can be used depending on your preference. I am not allergic to black bars, so I just use the top screen for everything, but you can throw these systems onto either screen and enjoy them. Nintendo 64, Sega Dreamcast, and PSP are all the same as well. There is no issues playing any game from any of these systems, and you can throw them onto whatever screen you want. Just enjoy them. They are fun systems to play. PSP, you can upscale to your heart's content. If you want to go up to 4K, you can. It does not matter. PSP is awesome on the top screen because of 16:9, and this is a fantastic device for PSP. Then we get to Nintendo DS and 3DS, and I did an entire showcase of 58 3DS games, and you can check out that video to see whatever game you want to see. But outside of a small handful of games, which apparently, from the comments on that video, can actually be fixed, this is the quintessential DS and 3DS experience. I have set DS to be 8x upscaled, and I have set 3DS to be 4x upscaled. And it is just an awesome experience because I forget that I am emulating when I am playing these games. For example, I tried and I failed hard at playing Trauma Center. Never played it before, but it is a hard game, and I was using a stylus. The game is hard as hell, but it is super fun. I was loving my time with it. Then I played some Nintendogs. I talked about this earlier. Nintendogs, super fun. Such an enjoyable experience. Tried out some Super Mario Brothers. I played the entire World 1. And yeah, I was enjoying it. And so on and so on and so on. I have played and tried, I think, pretty much every Nintendo DS game that I have at the moment. And even book games work properly here. Even if I suck at Rhythm Paradise, it still works here. And so because of some comments that I got on me sucking at some games in my last video, I spent a lot of time playing rhythm games this weekend. I played a lot of Elite Beat Agents. I've never played it before. It is super fun, and I ended up getting really good at it. I still suck for the most part, and it's absolutely a skill issue, but I was enjoying my time with it. I do want to be very clear on this. There has been no point in my time with this device where I have felt that latency is an issue or the reason why I am bad at a game. I have no way to measure this. I have no way to make people happy scientifically about this. I can only speak to how it feels to me. The bigger issue to me was that my stylus sucked. Once I got a new fiber tip stylus, I saw a massive improvement and I've been having a lot more fun. It is the exact same experience with 3DS. Now, I talked about it before, but for all of these games, I've pretty much just stayed in 120 Hz mode. And for 3DS, I also keep VSync off. I was having a blast just playing games on 3DS. Now, I do not think there is any extra added lag here on the Thor specifically compared to something like the AYN Odin 2 Portal at the same 60 Hz or 120 Hz modes. There is, of course, added lag because of Android and Azahar compared to an original DS and 3DS. But I have not found it to be detrimental to my experience playing these games, and 120 Hz mode has pretty much negated any actual input lag. I think if perfect latency is what you are after, the original DS and 3DS still exist. But as somebody who has both of those devices, there is absolutely no way I would give up all of the other benefits of the Thor to go backwards to those again. And I personally do not find the latency difference to be large enough for me to care. I have enjoyed all of my gaming experiences, and that's all I can talk about on this. Do with this information what you will. Then we move on to PlayStation 2 and GameCube. And I'm not going to spend too much time here because, again, all of this is well documented, but the entire catalogs of both, outside of the known hard to emulate games, are playable, completely upscaled, and in a beautiful way. I do think this gets forgotten a little bit when we talk about the Thor. Even I look at this as like a DS and 3DS device, forgetting all of the power that this actually has. But no, again, you have literally every single game available to you outside of the usual problem games that you can play. But again, you can go further, and I don't want to misrepresent this. But you do have Wii U and PS3 as well. Now, both of these are very early emulators. They are not far along yet. So I'm only showing you the parts that actually run and run well. I am cherry picking in this video. So again, these are early emulators. What you see here is not going to be the experience you will get for the entire game. However, as PS3 and Wii U start to develop more on Android, the Thor will eventually become the best way to play it. However, I don't know how long in the future that will take. So I am going to tell you right now, do not buy this device for PS3 or Wii U. Consider them as added benefits that you can test out once in a while. Lastly, let's talk about Switch very quickly. And this is the most documented of all systems online for Odin 2s. But yes, the Switch 2 runs here. Most games, some have issues. It does take some setup and so on. I don't want to spend too much time on Switch because I am a firm believer that you should just buy a Switch to play Switch games. But you can emulate it here. So as a quick recap, what can you play on the Thor? The answer is yes. Okay, so let's start to wind down here because this is the longest review that I have ever done. My voice, you can hear it, is actually starting to go. And I'm on a bit of a time crunch because I'm flying out on Wednesday, so I have to get this review done by Tuesday so you can all see it and make some decisions on what you're going to do about your purchase. The AYN Thor is an upgraded Retroid Pocket Flip 2. It has a lot of the same problems that has when I reviewed it. The triggers, the blocky nature, the ergonomics, the bendy outside. But it surpasses it completely with a bigger and better screen, a second screen, a better fan, better software, better battery, and a lot more power. I won't and I can't sit here and say that the Thor is a perfect device, because I don't think it is. But the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in comparison. This is a device that I can point to so many different things that I would change for the better. So many things that annoy me and anger me, and I hope does change for the better for a Thor 2. But that still can't stop me from recommending it overall right now. For DS and 3DS, right now, there is simply no better way to play those systems, and I'm going to stand by that. For using a guide on the bottom and a game on the top, there is no better way to play that way than this device. And it is also easy to forget, but you have every other system in the world, plus the addition of the second screen to do whatever you want with. You are going to have to deal with the compromises that I talked about throughout my review, but at the end of the day, this is still a very easy recommendation from myself. Now, I've gotten a lot of comments on if this is going to replace my Retroid Pocket Flip 1 as my secondary device. For those unfamiliar, I basically only use an Odin 2 Portal and a Retroid Pocket Flip 1. It's 2 devices, that's all I need. The answer is yes, absolutely yes. This, again, not perfect, but it's a much better way for me to play games. I love it. So yes, it's going to replace my Flip 1. If the grip is good enough, it might actually be competition for my Odin 2 Portal for a lot of games because I like to use guides, and bottom screen guide, top screen game is like my perfect experience. So we'll revisit this. However, black is not my color. I am waiting for my white one to arrive, which again, I still have my pre-order. My money is where my mouth is in this review. I would cancel my pre-order if this device was not good, which complete opposite for me. Despite all of the negatives, I still want to grab this device every single time. The Thor just adds so much more to my gaming experience that the Flip 2 and Flip 1 do and did not, and any normal handheld does not. I haven't had this much fun rediscovering two systems that were always a compromised experience on handhelds in I don't know how long it's been. I can personally overlook a lot of the negatives just because of that. I just need Azahar to finally add retro achievements for 3DS games, and then my life will be complete. So Azahar devs, if you are watching, please just add achievements. So as a final thought, the AYN Thor is not a perfect device. It is flawed. There is some great, there is some good, and there is some bad. However, it is new, it is different, and it's been one of my favorite gaming experiences over the last few years. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about retro gaming. Support me through YouTube membership if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.